This is Taya Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland. 3 out of the 6 officers charged with the in-custody death of Freddy Gray are facing administrative discipline today after the criminal charges resulted in mistrial and acquittal. It's the last gasp of hope for community members who want these officers to face punishment. The trial board hearings are administrative, meaning they concern violations of departmental policy, not the law. And though open to the public for the first time, the police department barred our cameras. But the first hearing also offered something completely different than the criminal trial. A video of Caesar Goodson, driver of the van in which Freddy Gray died, describing what happened in his own words. And what he said raised more questions than answers. During a video interview spanning several hours, Goodson was halting, often telling investigators he didn't remember details of what happened during Gray's fatal ride. When asked why he didn't secure Freddy Gray at the first stop where Gray was loaded into the van, Goodson said he was too scared of a gathering crowd. It was getting hot, he told investigators. At the second stop, he blamed Gray. In fact, despite the fact that Gray was shackled in leg irons and in handcuffs after stop 2, Goodson continued to insist Gray was kicking and shaking the van throughout the nearly 1-hour ride. But the most curious testimony was on the secretive third stop, which Goodson didn't report or call in, an omission he couldn't explain. He told investigators after Gray was shackled in leg irons, he continued to kick the door, which is why he stopped the van to check the outer doors, but without reporting it, a violation of departmental rules. But he did not look at Freddy Gray, an omission he again couldn't explain. Then he got back into the van and drove for 2 minutes before calling Officer William Porter to check the van again. He said Porter spoke to Gray, but couldn't hear what was said. When investigators asked Goodson if he was concerned about Gray's health, he said no, even though Porter said Gray requested medical assistance. Goodson said he saw nothing urgent. We asked several people who attended about their impression of the proceedings. I'm here with Stephen Janis, who's covering the trial. Stephen, can you tell me about Caesar Goodson and what kind of defense his lawyers were using?
Well, the very interesting defense that they used, and one thing you would think the police would not use, was the consent decree and the investigation by the Justice Department of the Baltimore City Police Department. That report outlined how the Baltimore City Police Department uses racist, systemic problems with the department, that it was ill-equipped, the officers were poorly trained, and that was part of their main defense in the beginning of the opening of this hearing, was that Goodson wasn't trained, that Goodson didn't know what he was supposed to do, that Goodson didn't have
Wasn't he a 14-year veteran as a van driver?
Well, he did say, he said he'd been working with the wagon for 13 years, but their argument was also that the equipment was not malfunctioning, but inadequate, that needed to be replaced, which is one of the things that came up, that the doors were, he was afraid the doors were going to come off. So really, kind of a shocking beginning, because, you know, using, I'm sorry, you're going to say, but using... I
was going to say, weren't there 3 sets of doors, an inner door and then 2 sets of outer doors?
There's actually 4 doors, which is two inner doors, 2 outer doors. Okay. And the idea that Freddy Gray could kick those open while he was shackled on the leg.
And had leg irons,
right.
And he had his hands cuffed as well. It seems odd that he would be able to break through that series of doors.
That was their argument. But, you know, like I said before, just to finish the thought, you know, the Justice Department document became a defense that, you know, Caesar Goodson ignored policy, just like in the defense, in the criminal trial, that Caesar Goodson ignored policy because the department was so broken, and that it is a systemic problem, the reason that Freddy Gray ended up dying in the back of that van.
So essentially you're saying it's part of the culture of policing in Baltimore to ignore general orders and to ignore the best practices and policies.
Again, making that argument that, you know, the Baltimore City Police Department has absolutely no accountability, no command structure, no oversight, which, you know, is the same argument made by Marcus Taylor, one of the 7 officers who've been indicted, or 8 officers, excuse me, who've been indicted for racketeering and drug dealing and stealing from residents. He made the same argument that he should be released from federal prison because he was just doing what everyone else does. So we have heard this again for the umpteenth time, that the Baltimore City Police Department is completely unaccountable.
Now, we got to listen to a video of Caesar Goodson giving testimony. What struck you?
Well, there were several things that were really interesting. During the talk that he gave, they sort of went through stop 1, stop 2, stop 3, stop 4. And one of the main questions that investigators asked was, why didn't you why didn't you secure Freddy Gray in the back of the van at stop 1? And he said he was scared. He said that it was getting too hot.
Right.
And
there was a crowd building.
So he was too scared. And then they asked the same question, why didn't you secure him at stop 2? He didn't really have an answer for that because he said...
He did suggest that people, since stop 2 was so close to stop 1, that people were heading towards the van saying, did you tase him again? What are you doing to that?
But directly,
doing the Freddy Gray?
Directly, he was kind of citing the reason he was shackled was officer safety. He said, but did you ever express any concern for officer safety? Or did you see Freddy Gray do anything that would endanger an officer? And he didn't have anything. So basically, his main contention during that interview was, I was scared. I couldn't secure him because I was scared. And then he had some very interesting things where they were saying, were you concerned for his safety? Did you hear any noises? And he finally said in 3 he was concerned. And they said, well, what did you hear? And he said banging and kicking. And he continually talked about banging and kicking. He talked about the banging and kicking after Freddy Gray was shackled. Right. So Freddy Gray, if you can imagine, was handcuffed and shackled. But Officer Goodson says...
And placed inside the van on his stomach,
correct?
His
stomach. But Officer Goodson said even from that position, with that type of restraint, he was perfectly capable of banging on the van, of rocking the van, of making these noises. And it doesn't seem really interesting. But I think one thing that came up, Officer Goodson clearly covered up the stop he made at stop 3. This is after Freddy Gray has been shackled. He takes a sharp turn and then suddenly decides to get out of the van. He doesn't do a KGA, which I guess is when you're supposed to call in. Every time a van stops, one of these transport vans, you are supposed to call in. You never stop the van without checking in and telling people why. Well, he didn't really have an answer for why he didn't do it. He didn't say that he opened the van in the back. He said he just walked around the back, but didn't really see Freddy Gray. But then later on, when they asked him about what's called a run sheet, which a run sheet is where an officer is supposed to record every action he did, he did not mention this stop. He left it off his run sheet.
So we were kind of here today to just see the process and see how we can engage the community in it, or see if it's actually effective to have the community engage in this part of it. So it's a different type of court, but to us it seems like it's an intramural or a scrimmage game between the police department. I just didn't really see a lot of representatives of Freddy Gray's community, our community, the trial board, the defense. So it was a later interview, but it's still disheartening that in his testimony he talked about he was hearing the banging and the yelling, and when he stopped, it was to check the door to make sure the door didn't get kicked open, but he never spoke to Freddy Gray, or he didn't interact. And then that kind of reminds us of the culture of policing, where it's a separation. It was no recognition of humanity in that process.
The Real News is going to continue to give you coverage of these administrative hearings. I'm Taya Graham in Baltimore City, Maryland for the Real News Network.